So my name's Robbie. This is my second year at Foothill. I'm an applied math student. I'm taking this class as well as discrete math, and at nights I work at a restaurant.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a computer science major. This is also my second year at Foothill. I'm taking this class, linear algebra, computer architecture, and introduction to psychology. And outside of school, I work 3 days a week at a daycare.
Hi, I'm Loni. I'm a computer science major. This is my third year at Foothill, and right now I'm taking this class and Calculus 1D. And outside of school, I work here at Foothill through work study, and then through another job, through scholarship, and then as a caretaker for my grandma, and also as a tutor and TA.
Hi, I'm Lena. I'm taking this class. I'm taking Anatomy C, and I'm taking Intro to Political Science. And I'm a dually enrolled high school student, so I'm in the College Now program, and I do ballet and choir outside of school.
Today we're going to go over the process that we go through to get ready for class, or our whole class process, how we go about our learning. And so I'm going to start off right at the top here with our before class. The resources that we use are the videos, the textbook, and the provided quizzes by Jeff. To show an example, our group decided to follow the intermediate calendar, which can be found on Jeff's website. So each class period we were expected, like on January 26th, we were expected to have lesson 0 and lesson 1 completed. And when I say expected, I mean within our group we were expected. And then going down, we would follow this calendar. A quick example of what our notes might look like. For one, my notes look something like this, where I preferred watching the videos, although I also looked at the textbooks. So I would just take notes on all the videos. I would bring this to class, ready to learn and ready to talk about the material. In addition, before class, we'd complete the quizzes. So here's an example of one of the quizzes. Personally, I did direct feedback, where as soon as I answered the question, I'd go check if I got it right or wrong. And then also on the left here, we can see I captured some of my answers, or some of my reasoning behind my answers. Again, we'd bring this to class every day beforehand, so that we were ready to talk about the quiz and questions that we struggled with our fellow classmates.
Okay, so at the start of class, we would have kind of like a check-in with Jeff and the class in general, and then after that, so after the first 30 minutes of class, we would start our individual/group recall. And so for the first part, we kind of did a quiet and individual recall. And so this was of the chapter material and the concepts that we got from our notes. And then when everyone was ready, we would do a group discussion on the chapter. And so we would want to synthesize our collective understanding of the concepts and info, and then try to identify areas where we missed understanding. Oh, wait, sorry.
Okay, so as Robbie said, before we went to class, we would do the lessons that we expected to do in our group, and then for those lessons, we would do the corresponding quizzes, and we each had a different way of doing the quizzes. So like some of us would check our answers right after, some of us would wait until class, so it just depended on what worked best for us. And then we started off at the beginning of the quarter just going over what we did wrong, so we would like circle them in red and then try to figure out why they were wrong. And then eventually we realized, well, maybe we should go back and figure out, maybe discussing, like trying to teach each other why the ones that were right were also right, because we had the tendency to just skip over those. And then we also came up with a question board, because we were often left with questions that we couldn't understand. And so we decided that we would create a question board in our classroom so that other students and Jeff as well could look at it, and maybe as a class instead of just as a group, we could collaborate on those and figure them out together.
Yeah, as Anna was saying, we did a lot of changes in our group routine throughout the class, and one way that we moderated that was having a time of reflection at the end of each class. So for the last 5 to 10 minutes, we would talk about the class, we would talk about the work that we did, and we would bring up any changes that we'd like to make. So some examples of this were the question board, adding different types of recalls. So we started off doing no recall, and then we added group recall, and then we decided that we wanted to change to individual recall to make sure that every person got the benefits and that it was not just one person. And that was super helpful for our class, or for our group, because we continued to improve our process, and it was very flexible. It wasn't just like a set structure that we came up with at the beginning of the quarter and then stick to for the rest of the time. We just changed it so that it would work best for us.
And real quick, to give an example of the recalls that we did, they weren't particularly, organized. It was literally just grab a piece of paper and write down everything you think you remember. And so you can see there's a lot of scribbling out, there's a lot of kind of changes. And then, again, we would do this individually, and then we'd come together as a class and say, well, I remembered edge tables, and I remember they looked something like this, and I remember, I think pluses meant something and minuses meant something, or, here's how you do a directed graph diagram. And somebody else would go, wait, I actually think it's like this, and you'd scribble something out or something else. And so the recall isn't isn't super formal. It was just, trying to see what we remembered and what we might need to work on.
And then I just want to add that after that, we would go back to our notes and figure out what in the recall we did right and what we did wrong and what our weaknesses were.
Can I ask some questions? This is Jeff.
Yeah,
I'm going to come. I don't know if you can hear me on that mic. I just want to ask some questions of this group. One of the reasons that we're here today is because this group, I think, one question I would have is, how did this whole system work for you? What was it like to develop these systems and to work together, and what did that mean for your experience in the class, right? And I just might ask each of you to say a few sentences about what this has meant for you and what it did for your learning.
Do you want to start?
Sure. I think the biggest thing it did for my learning was this idea of meta-learning. It might sound a little bit silly, but doing that recall session, or the reflection section, where we sit there and said, what could be better, what could be worse, what did we like and not like, how did this affect my learning, do we feel like we understand this material better than the material we did yesterday or the day before, when you start to think about your thinking, you all of a sudden, your thinking gets a lot deeper, and you're understanding the material improves at a quicker rate. And so I think for me that was probably the biggest thing, is taking this forward into other classes, realizing that learning isn't just one way and you can actually improve how you learn.
For me, I think at the beginning it was definitely challenging because a lot of the times we come to class and don't really talk to anyone and just get a bunch of information and go home. So it's a different experience coming to class ready to talk to other people and discuss with each other about math. And not only that, but we also, especially in our group, became really connected and we communicated with each other about other things, which I think helped us become a better learning community together. And something that I think really helped me in this kind of learning was that we would prove things, and we would know that they were right or that the answer to our problems were right, and then we would go on the board and as a group we would figure out why they were right. And instead of taking information for granted and oh, this is right because Jeff says so, or this is right because the textbook says so, we figured out that it was right because we knew it was right because we solved it ourselves.
Yeah, adding on to that point, there were a bunch of things that the answer key might not have been completely correct, and instead of assuming that that was correct and having maybe a misconception or no knowledge, having our group work sort of prove that was super helpful in making connections between things, and I felt that it really just helped my learning a lot. And having such a productive group work atmosphere made me super motivated to do the work ahead of class, because if I didn't do the work ahead of class, then I wouldn't be able to fully participate in the in-class work. And I had so much joy and learning from the in-person, in-group work that I really wanted to do that ahead of class work.
Yeah, adding on to that, at times I kind of struggled keeping up with the calendar because I had a lot of commitments outside and sometimes I would just burn out. But the group environment and also the group expectations that we created at the very start of the quarter really encouraged me to keep putting in the work to come prepared to class on time.
If I could add one thing that I think all these three people touched on is the idea of, we're talking a lot about work, we're showing a lot, every day we took 5 quizzes or we took 10 pages of notes, but I mean, to start off the day, it was how was your weekend? What did you do? Today, Loni asked me, what did you do this weekend? And, or over the last week, we hadn't seen each other in a little while with finals week and everything. We talk about Lena going to choir and she's going to go to New Zealand and Fiji. And and it's nice to be friends with people, and it makes you want to come to class, and it makes you accountable for what you're doing. But also, it makes you a lot more likely to share things. Like if I was just in a group where all we did was learn, I probably wouldn't have brought up like maybe we should try doing this recall thing because I don't think I'd feel as comfortable. So as much as we're talking about group work is all about work, there's also you have to build a group.
Yeah, it was really quick. I just remember that one time we were sitting in class and Lena said that the way that we learned in this class and how productive we were as students made her motivated in all her other classes. So I thought that was really telling of just how this system could motivate us.
Like Robbie said, being able to share your feedback with the group was really important, and being able to have like a comfortable group environment allowed us to share our feedback. For me, we did a recall as a group, and I kind of had a feeling that I was not getting as much as I could out of it because I would be able to be silent and kind of just follow what everyone was saying. So I suggested doing an individual recall to kind of combat this discomfort.
One thing I would love to have you all talk about, if it's okay, I'm going to speak loudly because that microphone's kind of far away, is the way that each of you, so if you can get a really concrete idea, a lot of times students are like, I don't have the time outside and I don't really know how to work with others in this way. And so one question I would ask to each of you is, one, how much time did you spend outside of class before the in-class experience? When you were spending that time, how did you think about preparing yourself to be able to engage together? And then how did you work as a team to kind of support each other? You kind of mentioned some of that. But specifically about the idea that you're doing work not only for yourself but your group mates, like how do you manage that professional commitment? Because we're really talking about like knowledge-based group work, right? And so I'd love it if you just speak about that, because there are some major differences between what you're doing and what most classes assume, right? And students, when they come in, you got to imagine they're like, I don't know how to do this, I'm not sure how to make this commitment. So if you could just, each of you speak to that, I think it would be really helpful for future generations.
You want to start down here?
Sorry, what was the question?
So how long did you spend before class? What were you doing specifically, right?
Okay.
Yeah, we'll start there. And then anything about what that meant for your group, right?
Okay, for me, it took about 2 hours-ish per note. So if I had 2 notes, it would take me around 4 hours, and then the quiz would take me around 30 minutes to an hour. And then...
And was that an expectation that you all had set together? That you were, like,
yeah.
How did that work? When you were thinking about, like, I'm going to finish this today, was that something that you had spoken about, or was that just something that you decided individually without speaking about?
At the beginning, we decided to follow the intermediate calendar, and we didn't start out doing the quizzes, but we did have the expectation that we would complete the notes prior to coming to class and then talk about them. I think at first we started doing the problems in the textbook, and then we moved on to doing the quizzes, but we also had discussed what if I'm unable to complete the notes, what would we do in that case? And I'm pretty sure we just said that it's fine, like stuff happens, and if you want you could do individual work during the group work, and sometimes I did do that.
How much time did you spend? What did you do specifically prior to class, right?
Yeah, so for the notes, I've spent more time later in the quarter than earlier in the quarter because the content definitely got more difficult. I started like with an hour and a half per note, and then towards the end it was maybe 2.5 hours per note. And then the quizzes were also pretty variable. A couple of quizzes just took me 30 minutes to do. A couple of quizzes I spent like 2 hours doing. And as Loni was saying, it was like this sort of expectation that we completed that work ahead of time. A couple of the times I had a lot going on and I couldn't do the notes and the quizzes before class, and what I did then is while other people were doing the recall, I would sort of read through the notes, try and get a preliminary understanding of it so I could at least somewhat participate in the group work. So although like I wasn't super clear on all of the concepts, I felt that I could still participate a little bit and follow along in the group work that happened after the recall.
For me, I think each lesson, probably the notes took around 2 to 2.5 hours. I think later around lesson 27, it probably took around 3 hours or more. So it took quite a while. So if there was 2 lessons due, which the intermediate calendar had a lot of days where there was 2 lessons due, it'd probably take around 6 hours of notes. And then the quiz would take 1 hour. I wouldn't actively correct them. I would do that in class, so I saved time on that. But I think I was just motivated, like everybody else said, just to be able to participate and engage with my group mates. And I just remember that sometimes if people weren't able to finish things, the people that did finish them and did participate in the recall or like proving things on the board, we would take pictures. And then once the other person caught up, they would have access to what we did in class, so they could also work on that individually later.
Like I said, I used the videos to take my notes, so I think it's pretty directly correlated to that. I'd say it was about double the amount of video time there was. So some lessons had 45 minutes of videos, so it would be double that. Some lessons had 2 hours, so then that might be 4 hours. You know, so I kind of went based off video length. In terms of the quiz, I did correct myself on the quiz, and I did spend some time trying to figure it out. So I would spend between 35 minutes and an hour, I'd say. Again, a lot of the quizzes, you know, some might be 5 or 6 questions, some might be 35 questions, so it's pretty hard to gauge, but you definitely want to build in some time. Beyond that, I think working as a group, I don't want to say pushed me to do more, but I definitely held myself more accountable, because I knew that when I came to class, there were going to be 3 other students waiting to talk about the material that I was learning right now. So I knew that I couldn't skate by. You know, in other classes, you can skate by and the teacher's going to ask another student, and you don't have to have all the knowledge there and all your questions ready. But when you're in such a small group and you're all learning the same thing, you know, any gaps in your knowledge kind of come out. And that can be scary, but it's also a really, really good thing, because when those gaps come out, hopefully your group mates can, you know, help plug those holes and fill it in, and all of a sudden, you know, you're really learning. And I'd like to share real quick a little bit what Loni was talking about. This is at the very first or second day of class, or the second day as a group, we got together and wrote this. So this was back in January. This is a winter quarter, so now we're in the end of March. And so we wrote a couple things down, like before every class, watch videos, take notes, you know, write down your questions. And then we said, again, at the beginning of class, we said try not to solve problems so we can bring them to class. We ended up changing that quite a bit. And then we also had a system for, you know, if somebody missed the notes, what's going to happen. And then we set up a little bit of a calendar where we said, you know, Jeff's going to talk, then we're going to do recall, then we're going to ask questions, then we're going to review things. And again, things changed, and this wasn't like a concrete schedule. We didn't set a timer and say 20 minutes of recall, okay, we're done. You know, this was just sort of like a baseline, you know, what we wanted out of this class and what we thought would be useful. And so that Loni was a little bit referring to this in terms of, like, you know, how we set it up.
I have 2 other things. I guess the first one that I'll start with that I really appreciated about your group was the how you dealt with questions. There were multiple instances in the quarter where I saw you all waiting to ask others. Like, you would really struggle together for a long time before you posted. And I remember one instance, I think you all were working on something for like 45 minutes, and only after you struggled and asked a bunch of people did you ask me. And then I gave you like 3 sentences, and then you just went back to work and you solved it, right? Can you kind of talk about that grit and how you approach that? Because I think it's a really important part of your group work that I would love to help others do, because we're really challenging the idea that the only person in class that can answer a question is the teacher. And we're getting into the idea that you all are peer educators, that you all are teachers of each other, and actually 99.99% of what you're worried about, you all can figure out together. And I'd love just to say a few words about that. And I have 2 more questions, and then we can kind of wrap up. But this is the third to last one.
Yeah, maybe Jeff can put in like an image in the video, I don't know how hard that is, of the boards in the other classroom, because that's where we really do our work. And there's like about 4 whiteboards, and we'll take up the entire whiteboard in one class where we're trying to figure out a question. But like Jeff said, when we come across something, first we'd work within our group, and, you know, like probably 60-75% of the time, somebody within our own group could say, well, here's why it makes sense and here's why it works. And then that other 30% of the time, we'd go beyond our group and we'd ask other people, like, hey, you know, how does this work? Can you explain it? And if that didn't work, then, you know, maybe 5% of the time, 5% of our questions, we'd have to go to Jeff and ask. But before we did that, like Jeff said, we'd spend 30 minutes to 45 minutes, you know, really working on a problem, trying to figure it out. And I think part of that comes from, we had a really basic understanding of, like, what scalars are, how multiplication works, how addition works, how vectors work. So we were able to like break it down really, really simple and then try to build up and like, okay, if we know this and we know that, can we build, this fact?
I think the reason why, or I think at the beginning we definitely didn't have those whiteboard moments, and I think it got to that because as a group and not coming to class just to sit through a lecture, but coming to class and having to actually know what we're talking about required us to do more deep learning on our own time, and so we became more equipped with knowledge and skills for us to do that. And then also I think once we started to get into that mode of like, oh, we really want to solve this, it kind of created like an itch, like we just like wanted to solve it. So like there was like, if we had started that on the whiteboard, like we couldn't just sit down and be like, oh, it's okay, we don't get it. Like we were like itching for the answer.
Yeah, definitely. There were class periods where we spent pretty much the whole time working on a particular problem. And as you were saying, I think the reason we were able to do that was because we had such a solid understanding of the basics. And I think that some of the times we ended up not being able to solve the question in our own group, but doing the work to try and solve that problem solidified like our understanding of the basics, like of matrix vector multiplication, of matrix multiplication, in such a way that we did that so many times in our attempt to solve these problems that we were super confident in it in the end, even if we then had to go to you, to Jeff, to in the end solve the question.
Yeah, I think this expectation was created also from the start of class where you talked about the concept of a tank question. And so we had this expectation that we should try our best to figure it out amongst ourselves before we go to you.
Can you kind of describe that language, a tank question?
Okay, a tank question is a question that you've tried really hard to solve it using your resources. You've asked your group, you've asked people outside of your group on how to solve it, and no one seems to know anything. So then you go and ask Jeff, you.
Don't kill a fly with a bazooka. Okay. So if you're going to take a fly, kill it with a fly swatter, only bring in the tank when you have a building that needs to be demolished, right? Yeah, love it. I guess did you have more?
No, it's okay.
The second and last question that I'll ask is about the interrelationship between what you're doing in your groups and the Conquering College and meta-learning reading, ultra-learning, stuff like this, right? Like how did the Conquering College activities and the meta-learning reading that you do affect the work that you did together, right? And I have a specific question for Robbie in a bit, but like I'd love for you to talk about that, right? Because it's such a different aspect of this class that can be very confusing for students as they're first figuring out, like, just did all this work on meta-learning and he's asked me to read these books and then we're supposed to, like, I don't understand how these piece together. And I'd love for you to talk about how the individual work you were doing on meta-learning connected to what you were doing in class and how it kind of guided the group work you were doing as you grew.
Well, from the start of the quarter, we started doing Conquering College, and so that led me into the perspective to be mindful about my learning process. And when I encountered difficulties in the learning process, to dig into those like discomforts and try to find out a solution to them. For example, I think we kind of talk about it in reflection. Like I did some research on group effectiveness, and so we kind of talked about like having this reflection period to think about what we liked or things that we could change. So that came out of this mindful attitude.
Yeah, so my favorite Conquering College lab that we did, I think, was number 3, the note-taking one. Was that correct? And I thought that had a lot of ideas and skills that both were applicable to this class and how, like a sort of basic strategy for how we should take notes in this class. And also it had a bunch of skills for applying to other classes that aren't structured in this way, where you do have to take notes from like an in-person live lecture. Just behind the camera. But what was I saying?
Saying that it has Conquering College Lab 3 has things about taking notes in live lectures.
Yeah, so for me that was super helpful, and then also some of the other labs that were talking about how to learn and Ultralearning, talking about like the principles of directness and feedback, and I thought that how this class was structured and how we ended up structuring our group work was based a lot upon the principles that we learned in Ultralearning. So I found reading that book super, super interesting, and it made a lot of the things that Jeff does in his class make sense.
As Lena said, I enjoyed Lab 3 just because it talked about the learning portfolio, and I remember at the beginning we were like, oh, what is that? And then just the way that it was described as a resource that we could have, that it's personalized to us, and at any point in time we can go back and with a little bit of like review be able to understand what we were doing in that moment. I think that helped guide my notes, and I improved on them throughout the quarter, but I definitely saw that things that were suggested in meta-learning note-taking techniques were helpful, like writing down my questions and the answers. And then also in regards to Ultralearning, I know a lot of our ideas of how we wanted to structure a group work came from that book. So like recall was one of them. I remember Robbie came to class and he was like, oh, I read this, so we should try it. So yeah, it came from the book, the ideas.
Yeah, Anna just stole my answer a little bit. I was going to say, we've talked a lot about recall, and you've heard about it, and that came, I was lucky enough to, I read every night, and so I just, put Ultralearning as the book I read every night instead of whatever I was reading before, so I was able to, finish it pretty quickly, and when I came across this idea of recall where, Scott Young talks about, is it Scott Young? Yeah, he talks about, I sat there, while I was doing something, and I forced myself to try to remember it, and, that shows you, your gaps in your knowledge and stuff. I instantly brought it to class. I actually wrote it down on my notes on my phone because it was like 10:30 at night, so I didn't want to text the group and wake anybody up. So I wrote it down on my notes, and the next day I said, hey guys, here's all the ideas I have that we should try in our group work. And that was literally directly from Ultralearning. And so Ultralearning definitely had a big impact on, the meta-learning and, how our group work comes together.
The last question that I'll ask about Concrete College, and then I'm going to ask the final question, which is just general advice, but it's specifically for you, Robbie, because at the beginning of the quarter, I think like week 2, I really appreciated your honest feedback about, you're like, I don't know if we want to use the same language because it was colorful language. I want to. I don't mind dropping an F-bomb every once in a while. But you said it specifically in that Concrete College Lab 1, I had told you like for every 1 hour of class, do 4 hours out of class. Would you mind just sharing your reflection on first reading that and being like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And then second, after having spent the whole quarter, what you think about that now? Right?
Yeah. So what Jeff's talking about is in Concrete College Lab 1, it talks about, your fudge ratio, and for each unit in a class, you should, if you want an A, you should expect to spend 4 hours outside of class. So I kind of looked at that and said, well, I got A's last quarter, and I sure as hell didn't spend, 80 hours a week doing, out-of-class work. And so I kind of took that and was like, who's this guy to tell me what to do? I know how to, manage my time. I know how to sign up for classes. And, I didn't write him off or anything. I just wrote down these thoughts and brought them to class and, talked to Jeff about it. And as the quarter went on, I started to realize that when he says A, he wasn't as much talking about, getting a good grade as opposed to truly understanding and learning the material. And so, well, maybe, some things you understand more and you don't need 4 hours. Having 4 hours to, drill down and think about a topic and learn it is, maybe at minimum what you need if you truly want to, walk out of this class understanding the concepts and being able to apply them like in your real life. So, I would say, obviously have your opinions and stuff, but keeping an open mind in terms of, he's been doing it a while, and, he gets a lot of feedback from students every year who think they know better. And so, you'll start to see it as you go on that, some of these things start to pop up and you go, oh, that's why that makes sense. Oh, that's why that makes sense. And so, Concrete College Lab 1 definitely showed me quite a bit as the quarter went on.
You all want to put anything in there about just like the commitment and time and the difference between what it means to get an A and what it means to truly learn, right? Like, because in this class we kind of focus on the learning piece of it, right?
Yeah, I think I just want to focus on the fact that spending 4 hours for every 1 hour is a different kind of A, and it's not, I'm passing this class, I'm going to forget it once the quarter ends and I have an A for my GPA. This is like I can go back to this and I can solve a problem later and I can apply it to any other subject.
Yeah, I think that's really the difference between like A means, well, A and just like in the grading scheme means that you gamed the system enough, you took the tests, you were able to like show your learning in a way that the teacher saw, versus like the true learning that we got in this class is, will this stick with you later on? Will you be able to apply this to future years? If you're going to go into this field, will you be able to use this class as the building blocks, or will you have to rebuild that structure every time you need to use the information?
Yeah, it kind of made me reflect on all my classes I'd taken previously and trying to recall some knowledge from it and realizing, I don't know what happened. Even if it was just last quarter, I didn't really take any portfolio style notes. And so I'm very grateful to this class and introducing me to that, because I've started to do it in my other classes this quarter.
Yeah. In other words, grades need to go away because they do nothing helpful, right? I'll talk more about that. The last question that I would ask is, remember way back when we first met each other, and you looked up front and you're like, this guy is nuts, and this class is crazy. Those are both true statements now as well, but I would ask you to kind of remember your mindset, and what parting advice would you give to the next generations of students who you are teaching right now, right? What would you say to them about their worries and concerns and like things that you wish you would have known? So what would you end with? Like, what advice would you give as your parting shot after having experienced and survived this?
Okay, I'll start. I would say, first of all, you know, Jeff will say this, if you watch the videos, you'll hear it 1,000 times. Don't trust me, don't trust anybody, you know, prove it for yourself. And I think, you know, keep that true. You know, don't trust anything Jeff says. Don't trust anything I say or any of us say. You know, try it out, see how it works. If it doesn't work for you, I'm sorry. If it works for you, great. But, you know, there's, you know, so don't, you know, just, you know, don't take it at face value. You know, really look deep. I would also say, you know, talk to Jeff about it. If you have issues, if you feel something, you know, he probably's heard it before. He'll give you an explanation. You know, maybe it won't be satisfactory, but at least you'll have some answer. You know, don't think, oh, what is he talking about? I don't understand this. He sounds crazy. And then, you know, walk out of the classroom. If you really feel that way, you know, write it down, talk with him about it so that you can understand, you know, maybe some logic into why these things happen.
You can always challenge me. You can always challenge me. I am here to serve you. I am your servant. You are my boss. Right? It's one of the things I love about working with all of you. You've in multiple cases, right?
I would say just keep an open mind. I know at the beginning I was very hesitant about, he was just talking for a really long time, and I was like, this is really weird. I don't know what he's doing. But I would keep an open mind because now my opinions have definitely changed. And also I would say in terms of how to get the most out of this class for yourself, I would spend, I think, the first 2 weeks where we did Conquering College, I would talk to a lot of different students and figure out who is kind of on the same level as you, who wants to do the same calendar as you, who is as motivated as you, and that way you can build a group that is up to your standards, or like you guys want to do the same thing. So no one is bored, everybody is communicating, you're able to build a good connection.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of the advice that you guys both gave. I'd say definitely keeping an open mind is the most important thing, and sort of trusting the Conquering College labs that even they seem, at least I remember being like, oh, this is a lot of work. This seems sort of useless. Why aren't we learning math right now? But it is useful. It does come into play later in the class, and I definitely say, like, put your effort into it, and it pays off, like, later in the class, that you have that basis of knowledge that the rest of this class is built off of.
Yeah, I remember, was it Marina, the person who did Maria. I remember when I first saw that video, I felt a lot of despair, and I thought, how am I going to be able to do this? Like, these people are crazy. Like, I can barely do notes right now outside of class. So I definitely felt a lot of fear and apprehension towards being able to create those skills of taking notes outside of class for my own learning in a very in-depth way. And as I went on, it became easier and easier, and I realized that that type of learning is something that you can practice. And so I would say to not be scared and to believe in yourself, as cheesy as it sounds.
Real quick, I wish I could have ended it on Loni, but just so everybody knows, Lena joined our group on like week 7 or 8. So I would say be flexible. You know, if your group is maybe going faster than you or slower than you, or you don't feel like you're getting along well, like be open to be flexible. Like, I mean, she's a great part of our group now, but it happened more than halfway through the quarter. So don't feel like anything's set in stone. Like, this class is extremely flexible. It's for the students. So like be willing to own that and like make it your own.
Much love to you all. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.